Every woman in the Great Hall had been chosen for a reason. Jessica had not. She wasn't supposed to be there at all. She was supposed to be in the kitchens, scrubbing pots until her knuckles split, invisible the way she'd been for 3 years since her mother died and left her with nothing but a debt she could never repay. But the head cook had taken ill, and someone needed to carry the wine, and Jessica's hands were steady, and nobody ever looked at her twice. So she stood near the back wall of the Hall of Thorns in a borrowed servant's dress the color of faded copper, her dark hair pulled back in a knot already coming loose. A heavy silver pitcher balanced against her hip. The hall was enormous. Vaulted ceilings of black stone arched overhead like the ribs of some ancient beast, and between them hung banners of deep crimson and gold, the colors of the Valdris pack. Candlelight from 1,000 iron sconces threw shifting shadows across the gathered crowd, nobles and warriors and pack leaders from every territory, all watching the raised platform at the center of the room, where 5 women stood in a perfect line. The choosing. It happened once a generation. When an Alpha King reached his 28th year without taking a mate, the Elder Council selected 5 women from the highest bloodlines and presented them at the solstice feast. The Alpha would choose one. A political union sealed with a bond mark and a ceremony under the full moon. The 5 women were stunning. Lady Seraphine of the Northern Ridge wore a gown of silver that caught the light like liquid mercury. Beside her, Lady Marin of the Eastern Shore stood in deep plum silk. Then Lady Isolde in ivory and gold, Lady Thessa in midnight blue embroidered with stars, and Lady Corinne, the youngest, barely 19, trembling in a dress of pale rose. They were perfect. Each one a carefully selected offering to the most powerful wolf in the realm. And the most powerful wolf in the realm had not yet arrived. The crowd murmured. Jessica refilled a goblet for a broad-shouldered warrior who didn't glance at her and stepped back against the wall. Her feet ached in the 2 small shoes she'd borrowed from another servant. The bodice of the copper dress pinched at her ribs. She wanted to be anywhere else. Then the doors opened. Not the side doors the servants used, or the arched entryways where the guests had filtered in over the past hour. The great doors. The ones carved from a single ancient oak and banded with iron forged in dragonfire. 20 feet tall and so heavy it took 4 wolves in their shifted forms to move them. They swung inward with a sound like thunder, and the hall went silent. He walked in alone. Jessica's breath caught before her mind could form a reason why. He was tall. That was the first thing. Taller than anyone she'd seen, broad through the shoulders and chest in a way that spoke of raw, unrelenting power rather than mere size. He wore black from his boots to the high collar of his coat, the only ornamentation a thin band of hammered silver at each wrist, and the sigil of the Valdris line embroidered in dark thread at his chest, so subtle you'd only see it if you knew to look. His hair was dark, almost black, cut shorter at the sides and longer on top, pushed back from a face that was all sharp angles and shadows, a strong jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it hadn't smiled in a very long time. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Even across the length of the hall she could see them. Pale gray, the color of a winter sky just before a storm, ringed with something darker at the edges. They swept the room with a calm, assessing focus that made the air feel thinner. This was not a man who entered a room. He claimed it. The space around him seemed to compress, to orient itself toward him, the way iron filings align to a magnet, and every person in that hall felt it, leaned toward it, lowered their gaze. Adam Valdris, the Alpha King. Jessica had heard his name 1,000 times, whispered in the kitchens, spoken with reverence in the corridors. He'd taken the throne at 21 after his father's death, had held it for 7 years against challengers and border wars, and a political landscape that shifted like sand. They said he was ruthless, They said he was fair. They said he'd once ended a rival alpha in a challenge circle, and then carried the man's orphaned pup to the nearest healer himself. None of those stories had prepared her for the way the room tilted when his gaze passed over the place where she stood. It lasted less than a second, a flicker. His eyes moving across the back wall the way they moved across everything, cataloging, dismissing. He couldn't have seen her, not really. Not in the shadows, in a borrowed servant's dress, holding a wine pitcher. She was nothing. She was furniture. But something in her chest pulled. A sharp, bright tug behind her sternum, like a thread she didn't know existed, had been yanked taut. Her hand tightened on the pitcher. Her pulse kicked hard against her throat. She looked away. On the platform, the 5 women straightened as Adam approached. The elder council stood in their ceremonial robes of gray and white. 3 ancient wolves, whose faces were carved with lines deeper than the stone walls, and the eldest of them, a woman called Hesta, stepped forward with her hands raised. "Alpha King," Hesta said, her voice carrying through the silent hall with the clarity of a struck bell. "The 5 territories have offered their finest daughters for your consideration. Each carries the bloodline, the strength, and the grace befitting a queen. You may speak with each. You may take the evening to decide. Or you may choose now. The decision is yours and yours alone." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was the moment they'd all come for. Adam stopped at the base of the platform. He didn't climb the steps. He stood there, hands at his sides, and looked at the 5 women with an expression Jessica couldn't read. Not disinterest exactly. Something heavier. Something almost like exhaustion. Lady Seraphine smiled at him, confident, practiced, beautiful. Lady Marin met his gaze steadily. Lady Isolde curtsied with fluid grace. Lady Thessa lowered her lashes in a gesture of demure invitation. Lady Corinne looked like she might faint. Adam said nothing for a long moment. The silence stretched. The candles flickered. Then he turned away from the platform. The murmur became a gasp. Jessica watched his face as he stepped down from the dais, and she saw something shift behind those storm-gray eyes, something that looked almost like recognition, like a compass needle swinging to true north. His nostrils flared slightly, his jaw tightened, and then he was moving. Not toward the council, not toward the doors, not toward any of the noble families clustered in their finery along the edges of the room. He was walking toward the back wall, toward her. Jessica's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she felt it in her teeth. No, he wasn't. He couldn't be. She glanced behind her, expecting to see someone important, someone who mattered. But there was nothing behind her but stone and shadow and a tapestry depicting some long-dead battle. She looked back, and he was closer. 10 strides away. 8. 5. His eyes were locked on hers, and they were burning. Those pale gray eyes, burning with something that looked like fury and wonder and inevitability all tangled together. The pitcher trembled in her hands. He stopped 3 feet in front of her, close enough that she could see the pulse beating in his throat, close enough that she could smell him, something deep and warm like cedar smoke and winter pine, and something underneath that was purely, overwhelmingly him. Her wolf stirred for the first time in years. Not stirred, surged. Threw itself against the walls she'd built around it with a force that made her sway on her feet. The entire hall was staring. "What is your name?" His voice was low, rough at the edges like gravel wrapped in velvet. He wasn't asking because he was curious. He was asking because he already knew the answer mattered more than anything else he'd ever been told. Jessica opened her mouth, closed it. Her throat was dry. "I'm no one," she managed. "I'm just carrying the wine." Something flickered across his face. Not amusement, exactly. Something warmer. Something almost tender. That's not what I asked. Pauses. Jessica, she whispered. My name is Jessica. He said it back to her. Jessica. And the way he said it, low and reverent, like it was a word he'd been searching for his entire life, made something crack open inside her chest. He turned to face the hall. Every eye was on them. The 5 women on the platform stood frozen. The elder council looked stricken. Hesta's mouth was open, her ceremonial staff gripped in white-knuckled hands. I've made my choice, Adam said. His voice filled the hall without effort, deep and absolute, the voice of a king who had never once been disobeyed. Her. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the chaos began. Voices erupted from every corner. Outrage from the territorial lords whose daughters had been passed over. Confusion from the warriors. Shock from the servants who recognized Jessica as one of their own. Hesta stepped forward, her face tight with barely contained fury. Alpha King, this is unprecedented. This woman is not of noble blood. She is not one of the chosen 5. The right of choosing has traditions that span 1,000 years. You cannot simply... I can. Adam didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The law states I may choose any woman in this room. It does not specify which ones are eligible. It does not mention bloodlines or territories or political advantage. It says, any woman. He paused. Let the silence breathe. I've chosen. Jessica couldn't feel her legs. The pitcher was slipping from her fingers. This wasn't happening. She was a kitchen servant with no pack, no family, no wolf strong enough to shift in 3 years. She was nobody. She tried to step back. His hand caught hers. Not roughly. Like a question. His fingers closed around hers and the touch sent a jolt through her entire body, a rush of heat and light so intense her vision blurred. Her wolf howled inside her, a sound she hadn't heard in so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. Mate. The word slammed into her like a wall. Not a thought. A knowing. Bone deep, soul deep. The golden thread pulled taut and sang, a single perfect note that resonated through every cell. She looked up at him and saw the same recognition in his eyes. He'd known. From the moment he walked through those doors. I can't, she whispered. I can't even shift. My wolf has been silent for 3 years. I have nothing. His thumb traced a slow circle against the back of her hand. You are the only thing in this room that feels like breathing. The Lord of the Northern Ridge, Seraphine's father, stepped forward. A tall man with silver at his temples and cold blue eyes. This is an insult to every territory that participated in the choosing. My daughter was promised consideration. If you think I'll allow some packless servant girl to... Lord Harwin. Adam's voice dropped to something quiet and final. Finish that sentence carefully. Harwin stopped. Your daughter was considered. Adam continued. I have chosen someone else. If you wish to challenge the decision, the circle is outside. Hesta tried once more, at least allow the girl to be examined. Her bloodline verified. She is my mate, Adam said, and the words landed like a physical force. Verified by the bond itself, there is no higher authority. The word mate rippled through the crowd in whispers and gasps. Jessica felt it settle over her like a cloak, heavy and warm and terrifying. Adam looked at her then, really looked at her, and his expression softened in a way that transformed his entire face, stripped the king away, and left just a man standing in front of a woman, vulnerable and fierce and utterly certain. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. If you want to walk away, I'll let you. I'll face whatever comes. But I need you to know that I've been looking for you for 7 years, and I didn't know it until 30 seconds ago. Jessica's eyes burned. Her throat ached. Every logical thought in her head screamed that this was impossible, that girls like her didn't get chosen, that the debt she carried and the wolf she'd lost and the years of invisibility had been the universe making it very clear where she belonged. But the thread in her chest was singing, and his hand was warm around hers. And her wolf, her silent, broken, buried wolf, was pressing against her skin from the inside, trying to get to him. "I don't even have proper shoes," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. He looked down at her feet, at the two small borrowed shoes with the cracked soles, and when he looked back up, there was something in his eyes that might have been the beginning of the first smile he'd allowed himself in years. "Then I'll carry you." He turned to the hall. "The feast continues. My mate will be seated beside me. Any objection can be brought to the council in the morning." He paused. "I would not recommend it." The crowd parted as he led her through the hall. Jessica felt every stare like a brand. Her hand was shaking in his. She kept waiting to wake up. He felt her trembling. His grip tightened, an anchor, and he leaned down as they walked, his mouth near her ear. "I've got you. Whatever comes, I've got you." They sat at the high table. The feast resumed, but the energy in the hall had shifted, charged and watchful. The 5 women had been escorted from the platform. Lady Seraphine's expression as she passed Jessica was carefully blank, but her eyes were glass-sharp. Jessica couldn't eat. She sat in her copper servant's dress with her loose hair falling around her face and stared at the plate in front of her. Roasted venison, honeyed figs, bread still warm from the oven, food she'd helped prepare that morning. "You're not eating," Adam said beside her. "I'm not sure my stomach remembers what being full feels like." Something dark crossed his face. "When is the last time you had a proper meal?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He looked at her, really looked, and she saw him catalog the thinness of her wrists, the shadows under her eyes, the way the borrowed dress hung loose where it should have fit. His jaw tightened. "Who do you work for?" "The house steward, Lord Gavrin." The name landed differently than she expected. Adam's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very still. "Gavrin," he repeated, "of the Western Vale. He holds the servant contracts for the keep. He bought my mother's debt when she died. I've been working it off." "For 3 years. The interest keeps growing." She said it flatly, without self-pity. It was just a fact. The sky was dark. Water was wet. Gavrin's interest kept growing. Adam set down his goblet with a deliberateness that made the wine tremble in the cup. "We'll talk about this later, when there aren't 300 people watching." Later came sooner than she expected. The feast ended near midnight, and Adam dismissed his guards at the door to his private quarters. Jessica stood in the center of the room, a vast space of dark wood and firelight, with shelves of books lining one wall and tall windows that looked out over the mountain valley, silver with moonlight. "You can sit down," he said. She didn't sit. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself and finally asked the question that had been burning through her since the moment he'd crossed that hall. "Why me?" He was quiet for a moment. He stood near the fireplace and the light carved his features in gold and shadow, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, as though he was afraid of taking up too much space. "When I walked through those doors tonight, I could smell every person in that room, 300 wolves, their perfumes, their fear, their ambition. And then, underneath all of it, there was something else. Like standing in a forest after a rainstorm, like the first breath you take when you break the surface of deep water." He looked at her. "That was you. My wolf recognized you before I took my second step." Her chest ached. "I can't shift. My wolf has been silent for 3 years. Whatever your wolf recognized, it's broken." He crossed the room, slowly, giving her time to retreat. She didn't. He stopped in front of her and lifted his hand, not to touch her, but to hover near her jaw, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his palm. "May I?" She nodded. His fingers brushed her cheek. The touch was gentle, impossibly gentle for hands that could bend iron, and the moment his skin met hers, the golden thread between them blazed to life. She gasped. He inhaled sharply. The connection was a living thing, humming between them like a plucked bowstring, and through it she could feel him, his steadiness, his ache, his fierce and terrifying hope. "You're not broken," he said roughly. "Your wolf was protecting you, retreating so you could survive. But she's here, Jessica. I can feel her." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "She's been waiting." Something hot slid down her face. A tear. Then another. She hadn't cried in 3 years either. He pulled her against his chest. Not demanding, not claiming, just holding. His arms wrapped around her, and she felt surrounded by warmth and cedar and safety. A word she'd forgotten the shape of. Her hands fisted in the fabric of his black coat, and she pressed her face against his heartbeat. And she let herself shake apart. He held her through all of it. His chin rested on top of her head. His hand moved in slow circles against her back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The bond hummed between them, steady and warm, a sound like a lullaby made of light. When the trembling stopped, she pulled back just enough to look at him. His eyes were bright, wet at the edges. This man who terrified an entire realm was standing in his own chambers with tears he refused to shed because a kitchen servant was crying against his chest. "I don't know how to be a queen," she said. "Good." His mouth curved. "Just barely." "I don't need a queen. I need you." She kissed him. She didn't plan it. She rose on her toes and pressed her mouth to his, and the world dissolved. His hands came up to cradle her face. He kissed her back slowly, deliberately, like she was something precious. His lips were warm and firm and tasted faintly of honeyed wine, and when she made a small sound against his mouth, his self-control slipped just enough for her to feel the hunger underneath. The bond between them sang. Not hummed. Sang. A crescendo that filled her entire body with golden warmth and made something deep inside her stir, stretch, open its eyes. Her wolf. She felt it rise like a wave. Not the broken, silent thing she'd carried for 3 years, but something fierce and whole and burning with recognition. It pressed against the inside of her skin, and for one dizzying moment, she felt the shift flicker through her, the crack of bone wanting to reshape, the surge of power she'd thought was gone forever. Adam felt it too. He pulled back, his eyes wide, his breath ragged. "Jessica." "I felt her," she whispered. "She's here." His forehead dropped to hers. His hands trembled where they held her face. "I told you," he breathed. "I told you she was waiting." The next 3 days were a tempest. The Elder Council convened emergency sessions. Lord Harwin of the Northern Ridge formally protested the choosing. Lady Seraphine's mother sent a letter so coldly furious it was said to have frozen the ink on the page. And Lord Gavrin, the man who held Jessica's debt, requested an audience with the Alpha King. Jessica stood beside Adam in the throne room when Gavrin entered. She hadn't wanted to be there, but Adam had asked, and something in the way he'd asked, not as a king but as a man who needed her presence, had made it impossible to refuse. Gavrin was a thin man with narrow shoulders and a smile that never reached his eyes. He wore a coat of dark gray over a vest of muted gold, and his pale fingers were constantly moving, tapping, adjusting. He looked at Jessica the way you'd look at a piece of furniture that had been moved to the wrong room. "Alpha King," Gavrin began, his voice smooth. "I come to discuss a matter of debt. The girl, your chosen, carries an obligation to my household. Her mother borrowed extensively before her death, and the contract is binding. I'm afraid that until the debt is satisfied, she remains, technically, under my authority." Adam said nothing for a long moment. He sat in the throne of black stone and silver, and his expression was perfectly, terrifyingly calm. "How much?" he asked. 300 gold marks, with accrued interest. Her mother borrowed 60. Jessica said it before she could stop herself. Her voice was steady, but her hands were fists at her sides. 60 marks. For medicine when she was dying. You've inflated the interest every season. Gavrin's smile tightened. The terms were agreed upon. The terms, Jessica continued, and she felt her wolf pressing forward, lending her its heat, were agreed upon by a woman delirious with fever who would have signed anything to stop the pain. You knew that. You counted on it. Silence. The court watched. Adam watched. His expression hadn't changed, but the bond between them pulsed, and through it she felt something white-hot. Rage. Not at her. For her. "Lord Gavrin," Adam said. His voice was quiet, almost pleasant. That was worse than shouting. "I've had your financial records pulled. All of them. Every contract you hold in the Western Vale. Do you know what my auditors found?" Gavrin's face lost a shade of color. "I'm sure there are minor discrepancies. 47 servants held under fraudulent debt contracts. Interest rates exceeding legal limits on 31 of them. 3 instances of contract alteration after signing." Adam stood. The movement was slow, unhurried, the way a predator stands when it already knows the prey can't run. "Jessica's debt is void. All 47 contracts are void. And you, Lord Gavrin, will face a tribunal of the full council." He paused. "I would suggest you don't run. My wolves are faster." Gavrin's composure shattered. His face twisted, and he turned to Jessica with something ugly in his eyes. "You ungrateful little—" Adam moved. One moment he was by the throne. The next he was between Jessica and Gavrin, and his hand was around the Lord's collar, not lifting, just holding. Holding him the way you'd hold something fragile that you were deciding whether to break. "Finish that sentence," Adam said softly. "Please." Gavrin didn't. The guards escorted him out. The door closed. And Adam turned to Jessica with the rage still burning in his eyes, but softening, changing, becoming something else when he looked at her. "Are you all right?" She nodded, then shook her head, then pressed her hands to her face and laughed, a strange, broken sound that was half sob. "You pulled his financial records?" "The morning after the feast, I couldn't sleep." "Because of me?" "Because a woman who can't remember the last time she ate a full meal told me her interest keeps growing, and I wanted to take his house apart stone by stone." He said it simply, factually. Like wanting to dismantle a lordship for her was as natural as breathing. She crossed the space between them and took his face in her hands. He went still. Absolutely still, like a wild animal submitting to a touch it had never known before. "Adam Valdris," she said, "you terrifying, impossible man." "Is that a compliment?" "I'm still deciding." She kissed the corner of his mouth, felt the bond between them hum with warmth and want, and something that might have been joy. That night, under the full moon, her wolf came back. Adam stood with her in the courtyard, bare feet on cold stone, the sky a dome of stars with the moon hanging full and silver at its center. The bond between them was blazing, a golden thread she could almost see now, stretching from her chest to his. "Don't fight it," he murmured. "Let her come." Jessica closed her eyes. She felt it building, the surge of heat, the wild and ancient power that had been sleeping inside her for 3 years, buried under grief and survival, and the slow erosion of being treated like nothing. But she wasn't nothing. She was his mate. And her wolf knew it, had known it from the moment he walked through those doors. The shift took her like a wave. She cried out, Not in pain, but in release. 3 years of silence breaking open like a dam, and then she was falling forward onto 4 paws, and the world exploded with scent and sound and moonlight. She was silver. Her wolf was silver, sleek and bright as polished steel, and when she threw back her head and howled, the sound that tore from her throat was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. Adam shifted beside her. His wolf was enormous, black as midnight, with the same pale gray eyes. He pressed his muzzle against her neck, and the bond between them snapped fully into place with a sound like a bell being struck, clear and resonant and final. They ran together through the mountain passes, silver and black against the snow, and Jessica felt the last 3 years fall away like chains she'd been dragging through mud. When they shifted back at dawn, breathless and laughing, he wrapped his coat around her shoulders and pulled her close. "You're staying," he said. Not a question, not a command, a hope spoken aloud. "You couldn't make me leave if you tried," she told him. 2 months later, the Western Vale had a new lord, one chosen by the freed servants themselves. Gavrin's trial had been swift and public, and Jessica had stood before the tribunal with her chin raised and her wolf burning steady behind her eyes. 47 people walked free. Lord Harwin, faced with evidence of his own quiet investments in Gavrin's debt schemes, had withdrawn his protest with remarkable speed. Lady Seraphine had surprised everyone by sending Jessica a gift, a pair of soft leather boots with a note that read simply, "He never would have loved me. I'm glad he found someone he can." The mornings were Jessica's favorite. She woke in their chambers with sunlight streaming through the tall windows and Adam's arm heavy across her waist, his face pressed into the curve of her neck. The bond hummed softly, a constant presence like a heartbeat she'd always had, but only recently learned to hear. She traced the silver band on her left hand. The ceremony had been small, she'd insisted. Just the two of them. Elder Hesta, who had begrudgingly become one of Jessica's strongest advocates, and the moonlight. He stirred behind her. His arm tightened, his lips pressed against her shoulder. "You're awake," he murmured, voice thick with sleep. "You're observant for a man who can't open his eyes." He huffed a quiet laugh against her skin. "I can feel you thinking. The bond gets louder when you think." She turned in his arms. His eyes were open now, those pale gray eyes that had stopped an entire hall in its tracks, looking at her with the soft, unguarded expression he wore only for her. No king in this face. Just Adam. "I was thinking about shoes," she said. His brow furrowed. "Shoes? You told me you'd carry me, the night of the feast, because my shoes didn't fit." The memory softened his expression further, a look so tender it made her chest ache. "I meant it." "I know you did." She traced the line of his jaw. "That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That I was going to let myself fall." He caught her hand, pressed his lips to her palm, held it there against his mouth, and she felt the bond blaze between them, gold and warm and certain. "I was already falling," he said against her skin, from the first breath. She pulled him closer. The morning light turned everything to gold, his dark hair, her silver ring, the sheets tangled around them. Outside, the mountain valley spread wide and green beneath a blue sky, and somewhere in the distance, wolves were running. His hand found hers, their fingers laced together, and the golden thread between them hummed its quiet, steady song, the sound of two people who had found each other against every odd and chosen each other anyway. Not because tradition demanded it, not because a council decided it, because in a room full of perfect choices he'd walked past every one of them and found the only one that felt like home.